Matt, I used to own a farm in Illinois, a horse farm, and we had well water. And old farmers would tell me to throw a cup of bleach, it scared the heck out of me, into the well.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, just do that once a week or so into the well. Don't put it in a gallon of water or anything. Just put the cup in the well itself, and then it'll help disinfect the water.
Yeah, my sister had to do that, and she had a shallow well up in North Bend, Washington, outside of Seattle, on the edge of the Cascades, and her shallow well, she definitely had to disinfect it with bleach fairly often to keep bacteria from growing in there that would make her sick. And bleach is a really great thing to have in your emergency supply.
It's a great disinfectant.
Yeah, you can do if five drops of bleach will disinfect a liter of water. 5 to 10 drops of bleach. It takes time though, and it's temperature dependent. So if it's really cold water, it can take, like ice cold water, it can take 3 to 4 hours. And if it's chilly water, it can take an hour and a half.
By the way, if you have a wooden cutting board and you cut things like a steak or something, and then you go cook it, you don't just wash that cutting board. You should put some bleach on it and scrub it in there. Did you know that?
Correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah. Now, I wanted to mention, talking about like killing bugs and antibiotics. One of the most insidious parts about the glyphosate thing is that the last patent that Monsanto got in around 2010 on glyphosate was as a broadband antibiotic. So that same mechanism that strips the minerals out that kills the plants kills bacteria. And so what it does is when you're eating glyphosate-laden food, which most processed foods are, if they're not organic, you just assume you're getting glyphosate if you're not eating organic. And when you eat those foods, and Cheerios being one of the tested very, very high in glyphosate, you think it's not a GMO, and they say, oh, it's non-GMO. But some bright person at Monsanto figured out that if they sprayed glyphosate on grains right before harvest, it caused the stalk to wither and die, and then the grain desiccated. It dried out on the stalk. So when they stored it, they didn't have to worry about silos burning down and crops molding and stuff like that.
Jeez.
But you're getting
the chemical. Oh.
And so what that does is it kills the natural probiotic gut bacteria that you need to
the good stuff.
Food.
Yeah.
And so that's why people are getting so obese and why they're getting so sick in America is because they're eating this glyphosate-laden food. It's killing their natural gut bacteria. They can't digest their food properly. Plus, the glyphosate strips the metals and minerals out of your body. So what happens is you're eating tons of food and starving to death because your body is missing critical nutrients because it's not digesting properly because the gut bacteria is dead. Plus, the glyphosate is stripping the metals and minerals out of your food, the trace minerals you need for certain things for your own body. Now, it doesn't kill you like it kills a weed. It just makes you sick. So it's been tied to liver disease, liver failure, kidney failure, Parkinson's disease, numerous cancers, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, celiac disease, thyroid cancer, whole slew of things, autism, obesity, all of these modern ailments that weren't really around very much when I was a child or you were a child. Very few people had these problems. And a lot of it's been tied to glyphosate. Stephanie Seneff, an MIT professor, has done statistical analysis, and she sees a 97% tracking between the growth and the use of glyphosate and the growth of a variety of chronic diseases that are the bane of modern man.
Matt, let me get
you got to deal with.
Let me get this breaking story in sent to us by our researcher George Senda, the guy from Pittsburgh. The FBI late tonight investigating a report of a dirty bomb on a ship at the Wando terminal in the port of Charleston. The terminal has been evacuated along with a section of the Cooper River. The threat is for vessels more than the public. They are investigating out of an abundance of caution. Don't panic. We will continue to have information a little bit later on. So you talk about when disaster strikes, Matt Stein. There you go.
Yeah. Well, in one of my last chapter in When Disaster Strikes is the unthinkable, surviving a nuclear catastrophe. And I talk about strategies that are quite different, whether it's a dirty bomb is very different from how to deal with a nuclear blast, which is very different from a nuclear meltdown. And a dirty bomb is actually the best of the three different things that could happen, but it's still not a good thing to be around, and it can pollute a large area and scare people for a long time. But luckily, the chances of a dirty bomb killing large numbers of people, like in the long run, is pretty slim versus something like a Fukushima or Chernobyl, which statistically will probably kill millions of people over the next 20 to 30 years.
All right, let's go to the phones now. Randall is truck driving in Indianapolis. Welcome to the program, Randall.
How's it going, George?
Fine, my friend. Thank you. Hey, they may have a live show for us sometime next year in Indy. Make sure you're there.
I'll be there. I'll bring my twin brother with me.
You got it. Go ahead.
Hey, I was going to say, I drive a truck, obviously. I drive a tanker truck, and I haul GMO. That's exactly what I haul. I haul soybean oil.
Right.
I haul different blends of it and all that. And I got a comment, I got a question. I know I'm on here a lot, so I'm going to make it quick as I can this time.
Okay.
The comment I got is, a guy told me hold on. A comment I got is, we need to get more people access to recycle. In my opinion, we're still putting way too much stuff in the dirt and throwing dirt over the top of it. I'd much rather see it incinerated than buried. And the other thing I was going to say was, a guy told me one time, he said the best way you can buy non-GMO products is if it has high fructose corn syrup in it or corn syrup in general, that you shouldn't buy it.
Well, corn.
That's my comments for tonight. Nice and quick. Thanks, George.
Okay, my friend. Thank you. Go ahead, man.
Well, pretty much all of the corn made for high fructose corn syrup is GMO, and you can assume if you're not buying organic soybeans, you're buying GMO. And if you're not buying organic corn, you're buying GMO. But it's not just the GMOs the problem. The problem is the glyphosate is probably much more unhealthy for you than the GMOs themselves. And GMOs are grown to be resistant to glyphosate, so they can just pound them with glyphosate. So they go hand in hand, but the health risk from GMO is probably more from the glyphosate that goes hand in hand with the GMO than from the GMO.
You know, back to the GMO foods for a moment. When are we going to really get labeling for this stuff?
You know, I wish it was now. Vermont passed a really great labeling law, and then the Congress. The problem is that the corporations have bought both the Republicans and the Democrats, and so they came through and basically passed a law in Congress saying that you can't force GMO labeling, and so they overthrew state laws. There were several states that, on the heels of Vermont, who were saying to do it. So I don't know if we're ever going to get it. The only safe way really is eating organic. But again, you can have grains, like there is no GMO wheat. Not yet. It's coming soon, but not yet. There is no, and oats are generally not GMO, but they're ripened with glyphosate at the end of the growth cycle if they're not organic. For the most part, not necessarily all of it, but you can kind of assume it has it. So whether they're GMO or not, they're still laced with glyphosate if they're not organic. And that's the big important thing, is that you're poisoning yourself by stripping the minerals out of your body, and it makes people sick. It doesn't kill them directly like it kills weeds, but you're poisoning yourself also by killing the gut bacteria. And you can't digest your food properly when you're missing the right gut bacteria. And here's another point of fact, is two common bacteria now that are real problems are resistant to glyphosate, and that's C. difficile and Salmonella. And so those two bacteria, they can kill people and can make people very, very sick. In fact, my girlfriend almost died in the 80s from C. difficile. Now what's happening is factory farm-fed animals are fed all of this GMO-laced food filled with glyphosate, and so they're having problems with C. difficile and Salmonella, so they're pumped full of antibiotics to keep them alive in the factory farm thing. So it's like a vicious cycle. And so people are getting C. difficile and Salmonella too, because the good bacteria in their gut are getting killed by the glyphosate, and the bad bacteria go crazy because they're resistant to the glyphosate. So you're out of balance and unhealthy and sick all over America.
We've got Jim in Alamo, Nevada now, first-time caller. Jim, go ahead.
Hey, good morning.
Morning, Jim.
I just had a really quick question. Matt, if you could pull out your crystal ball, what do you think would happen first? A global implosion from one of your 6 or 7 trends, or, an EMP pandemic?
From
scenario.
some rogue bomb somewhere. Go ahead, man.
I think that it's probably going to be an EMP or solar storm, and on the heels of that will be a pandemic and multiple Fukushima-like meltdowns. Is most likely. Now, I could be wrong. If we manage to stave those off, then it'll be much more obvious. The global implosion will be something that you'll see coming in cascading falls. It'll be quite obvious. And when my wife was dying of cancer in 2013, I was praying and meditating and hoping for a miracle, because I'd had a couple of times in my life where miraculous energy of the Holy Spirit worked through me, and there was healings in people I knew, quite miraculous. And it's not something I can do on command. It just happened a couple times in my life. So I was hoping that was going to happen again, and it obviously didn't work that way because she did die anyways. But while I was praying and meditating, I had sort of a purple and green light came around me, and they, meaning the guides, the masters, the Holy Spirit, laid out the next 4 books for me. And the next 3 have nothing to do with the first 2 books, but the last one did. And I don't, you'll know whether this is all a bunch of bull or not in a few years' time if I manage to get all 4 books out. And we'll see. But the last book, they said, is when I'm this international bestseller, the last book is saying, hey, guys, our planet is going down really badly, and the people of the world have got to rise up and take our power back before it's totally game over. Now, whether this is just a fantasy in my head that happened that night when I was stressed out, a week or so before my wife's death, or whether this was the voice of Spirit talking to me, time will tell.
Next up, let's go to Barbara in Los Angeles. Hi, Barbara. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to offer some positivity to the doom and gloom of your guest.
Sure.
You always have David Bloom on Alcohol Can Be a Gas.
Yes.
And he has a really great alternative fuel program. And then there's Paul Stamets, who works with mushrooms and can remediate the soil and has done a lot of work with that, and worked with, I think, some security department for the government. And I think there's some positivity coming, and these mushrooms can do a lot of things. They haven't worked with radiation yet, but they remediated a lot of soil, and so I'll hang up and listen to your guest.
Okay, well, there's no question about these alternatives. The problem is the big money people, and as Matt Stein knows, are going to crush all that.
Well, I think the big money people are not necessarily going to crush it, but they have other agendas. They have their way of making money. And I have a lot of respect, and I personally know David Bloom and Paul Stamets, and I believe that there's thousands and thousands of people in this world that are part of the solution. And I believe that the voice of spirit and intuition will provide the guidance that the human race needs to solve our problems and avoid total apocalypse and the end of the world and the end of civilization and the end of human beings. But I also know that we have free will. And so there's a battle between greed and the powers that made their money in the old system, which is killing the planet, and the powers of good, which is saying, look, we must change the way we do business in our world. We must change these trends because these trends are killing the natural systems that make this planet livable. And so we as human beings have free will. And so part of this great cosmic drama is, are enough of us going to wake up and take our power back, that we can change the course, that we can slow the train down so it doesn't go off the end of the tracks and destroy everything. We have that power. We can do it. And if we're going to wait for the corporations to do it, part of the problem is with corporations is that a corporation doesn't have a conscience. And it says it must make as much money. Its duty is to its stockholders to make as much money as fast as possible. And the way it does that is by consuming the natural resources of the planet in as fast and as efficient a way as possible before the next corporation does it, so it can make the most money and reward its stockholders. And the problem is that without that conscience factor in there, what it means is that unregulated free market guarantees we'll get to the end of the line where we've consumed and destroyed the planet in as fast and as efficient a way as possible for maximum profit so that our stockholders can be rewarded before everything collapses around us. And that's a game over black end that I don't want to see and nobody really wants to see. So the big question is, how do we take our power back and avoid that black hole end of the game over point?
Well, that's a good question. How do you do that? Dan in Virginia, your turn, Jan. Dan, welcome to the show.
Well, George, this is Dan, the blind man of the angel.
Well, hello, Daniel. Good to hear from you again.
Well, my goodness. Hey, I have a special surprise for you, Matt. And what I'm going to tell you, this will be clarified if you will go to Gina Salvate, and she's on the staff there, okay? So you tell her that you've talked with me, and then she'll compliment what I'm going to say. Now, the thing about it is, no matter whether it's your work, which you've done to help blind people do skiing, okay, and no matter whether it's your books in regards to the networking of human and physical resources, what it all has in common with one another are these three factors which work together. You have short sequences, you have simple cycles, and you have small clusters. Do you follow me?
Not really, no.
Okay, now, in the basis, interactive and juxtapositioning mechanics, which ties it all together, there are short sequences, simple cycles, and small clusters. Those things capitalize upon the natural networking of people better than anything else. And if you will go look at your books and pray, and if you will use your intuition, what you will find is that within your work are those three factors.
All right, we'll check those things out, and then we'll check in with Gina to see what she's got here, too. We're going to come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast AM with Matt Stein and take your final phone calls next. Matt, your books, When Technology Fails, When Disaster Strikes, are still available, are they not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can get them at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any local bookstore. I always encourage people to order from their local bookstore when they can. Many stores stock them, and if they don't stock them, they can have them there in 2 to 3 days. And so, keep the money in your town, circulating in your town that hires the local folks. So by all means, order them there. But if you order them online, then that works too.
Getting back to when we started the program with you, and we talked about these multi-billionaires buying up, acres and acres of land for a coming apocalypse. What good is it if they're the only ones left?
Well, I don't, there's so many different scenarios, and nobody really knows how it's going to play out. Chances are, except for a real worst-case scenario, it's not going to be nobody left. The thing is to be able to get through that period where nothing's working, where there's no sewage pumps working, there's no water treatment systems working. And so what that means is that the people in the cities who don't have enough supplies to just hole up, They're going to have to go out and drink out of the duck ponds. They're going to be foraging for food. There's going to be riots. There's going to be water-based things. Water-based disease and pandemic will take the population down quite quickly in a fairly short period of time. So these billionaires are planning ahead. They're planning ahead to have seeds. They're planning ahead to have land where they can grow food. They're planning ahead to have weapons, to have self-defense, to have stores, to have solar systems, all of that. Now, obviously, nobody wants to survive and be the only one left, unless you like some, science fiction fantasy where you're repopulating the world and you're the sole survivor. But the chances are we're not seeing a world where nobody's left. We're seeing a world that will be radically changed and different from the world when that event kind of started going. And a world where there'll be a much reduced population, and who knows what kind of government or what kind of systems will be in place. And so these billionaires are trying to stock up stuff to help them get through that period and get to the other side. But yes, as a regular person, we can do the same. We need to stock skills. We need to stock basic supplies. Things like the ability to forage, extremely important. I like to tell a story of about a decade ago or more. I was on an air with somebody from Arizona who teaches primitive living and survival skills, and it might have been Cody Lundeen. I didn't know who Cody Lundeen was in those days. And he said that after they teach these skills for about a week, they'd split up and go out in the wilderness. And the rules were no fish hooks, no guns, no knives, just the clothes in your back. You had to do everything the Native American way. And typically the men and the women split into two different groups. And the men would focus on the manly things of hunting and fishing, because that's what guys like to do. And the women would focus on the traditional women tasks of foraging for edible fruits, nuts, tubers, berries, things like that. And come day 3, almost invariably, the women would take pity on the starving men. And people always get a big laugh out of a crowd when I tell that. Because it turns out that without guns and knives and fish hooks, that hunting and fishing was really tough with primitive skills and primitive, what they could only fabricate with their bare hands. Whereas the foraging, if you know what you're looking for, wasn't that hard. And so in the real collapse scenario, a lot of guys figure that it's their guns and their knives and fish hooks that are going to pull them through. But I grew up hunting in Vermont, and most hunters know you go out hunting the beginning of hunting season. Everyone wants to get out first day, because that's when game is plentiful and you can find it, and your chances of having good luck are much better. The last day of hunting season is usually a pretty terrible day to go hunting, because most of the game it's either been shot or it's made itself invisible. And in a collapse scenario, you're looking at the last day of hunting season 100 times worse. And so your ability to forage, your ability to get by with what you can carry on your back and to be able to move over the land, that in a scenario like that, that's really important. Now, I hope it never happens. I'm not somebody who's waiting for apocalypse and, rubbing his hands together and saying, oh boy, I can't wait to try out all my cool stuff and all my survival skills. It's I'm really not waiting for that. But I would like to be insured. I like to be ready, and I like to be prepared at a reasonable level. And I sure hope it never happens.
Okay.
Not in my lifetime. Let's
go back to the phones. We've got Gordon in Lakeland, Florida. Welcome to the show. Hi, Gordon.
Thank you for taking my call, George.
You're welcome.
When you were talking about the glyphosate, let's say that I eat a diet, and I try to avoid that stuff, but it strips the minerals and maybe the vitamins. I took a multivitamin and mineral pill just a little bit earlier, and I chewed up some vitamin C tablets to help drive it in solution. And I'm wondering how much that can compensate for the loss of vitamins and minerals. I know that America's diet is not good, and we have higher incidences of cancers, and our lifespan is slipping. Other countries are beating us. And so I would like your thoughts on that. And I'll hang on the line just in case you have other questions or I have other questions.
Sure. I'd say that really good food-based minerals are very important. Now, a lot of minerals, some real low-cost minerals don't do you much good. They're like eating rocks, and our bodies are meant to digest food, not digest rocks. So having food-based multivitamins and supplements is very important. I think that superfoods from around the world are very important. There's a wonderful book by David Wolf on superfoods. I mean, and if you can supplement, the more you can take your diet and add supplements, add superfoods, add organic foods, minimize your eating non-organic foods. So, it makes going out to restaurants a real drag. So I love Mexican food, but I minimize my eating Mexican food now.
Moderation, Matthew.
It's moderation. It's a clean diet, and it's saying I can't be perfect in my diet, but I'm going to be as good as I can. I'm gonna minimize my contact with the glyphosate. I'm going to not eat the white bread, for the most part. I mean, I'll go out and I'll have a sandwich like everybody else, but I won't do that every day of the week. I'll have it now and then. I'll have Mexican food now and then.
Do you binge at all?
I really don't. I eat kind of disgustingly clean. I'm 60 years old. I went rock climbing today, and up at Donner Summit after my work day. I just got a workout and jumped on some ropes, and I can ski 20 or 30 kilometers in cross-country skis. So I really eat pretty clean, and I take a massive number of supplements. People make fun of me.
I do that too.
My wife made fun of me in all my supplements and said, "Oh, you're just expensive pea and you're peeing it out." And she's dead, and I'm healthy as a horse.
Did she not supplement?
No, just a little minimal. She minimal. She ate mostly organic. I mean, we weren't fanatic. We go out to eat in restaurants. We love Mexican food. So I can't just. Who knows? It's the luck of the draw. It's genes. It's what she grew up in post World War II Holland. Had an extremely high mercury in her body and had to go through chelation therapy. So who knows what factors contributed to it? I can't just say it's the supplements or my clean.
What kind of cancer did she have?
She had multiple myeloma, a blood-bone cancer, and
it's the worst kind.
They're all bad.
Yeah, but I mean, when it's in the bone, it's tough.
Yeah, and it was misdiagnosed for a long time, and I mean, 6 months before it was diagnosed, she looked at me and said, something's not right. I don't have cancer, do I? I said, no, you eat organic and you're exercising,
They missed it.
But then we went to doctors and we said, she was worried and I was worried. And we'd ask the doctors and they say, do you think it's cancer? I said, no, your tumor indicators in your blood are good. And we had an excellent alternative MD. It turns out multiple myeloma masquerades until somebody actually guesses it and orders a very expensive blood protein.
It was masked then.
They tend to miss it. Mostly it's found when people's bones start breaking. And they say, God, I can't believe it. I
brittle bones.
Something up and my shoulder broke, my clavicle broke. A friend of mine's wife died a few months after she was diagnosed, and she was feeling fine and knew something was a little off, like my wife, and then she, picked something up in her shoulder blade.
What were your wife's symptoms?
She had swelling in the gut, and
she was pregnant?
And pain around her heart, and it was diagnosed as pericarditis, swelling in the sac around the heart, and then it went away, and we couldn't figure out why. And I was worried about cancer too, because a friend of mine's wife had swelling in the gut, and a few weeks later she was dead. And so we asked again, and they had a full CT scan, and they found nothing, and blood work,
unbelievable,
all of that. And then she had extreme back pain, and she started having trouble walking, and urinary control was getting lost. And again, it was diagnosed as CT scan and said, oh no, it's not. We don't think it's cancer, and I think it's musculoskeletal. Well, thank God it's not cancer. Well, finally, a rheumatologist looked at her and said, well, it's none of the things I do. And he said he mentioned one disease, an autoimmune, and we said no, our doctor had already checked for that. And then he said, well, she's got a match for some symptoms for something called multiple myeloma. He said, I don't think she's got it, but I'll order this very special test just to make sure. And the day after Thanksgiving, he was on vacation at the Grand Wailea in Maui, and he called us from there and said, I got the results. and it doesn't look good.
He told you over the phone, I guess.
And he said, and I've got you scheduled for a meeting Monday morning in oncology at the state-of-the-art cancer center in Truckee, in my town. That was a brand-new cancer center. And by then, it was like 24 sites in her body, 3 massive spinal tumors that were blowing apart her vertebrae with stress fractures in the vertebrae, and she was like close to death. And she ended up living another year, and she pulled back from the edge and looked, and she thought, at one point she started walking again, walked a mile in Santa Cruz, and she said, I think I can beat this, and maybe I can really beat this. She started really having faith that she could do it, and then a series of events happened in her body, and she just went the other way, and when she was supposed to get stem cells therapy, she never got strong enough for it, and instead she was dead. So,
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was a horrible thing to go through, and there was a struggle of alternative versus traditional, and I knew if I pushed her one direction into alternatives and she died, I knew my daughter would never forgive me, and I felt like I couldn't take the responsibility of trying to force my will on her to make a decision, and so I supported her in whatever decision she wanted to go, and by the time she decided that she really was ready for alternatives, it was weeks away from hospice.
It's too late.
It was too far. Too far gone and too late. Too little, too late.
All right, let's wrap things up with final calls. Keith, truck driving in Illinois. Hi, Keith. Go ahead.
Hi, George.
Hey.
I've been listening to this, and at first I didn't know quite what to make of it, but ultimately, when people talk about everything going terribly wrong, one thing we need to do is redefine weeds.
Explain.
Hello?
Explain.
Okay. Well, you think about it. You've got coltsfoot thistle, dandelion, garlic mustard. These are all weeds.
Yep.
These are all things that people pull out of their garden and throw away. They burn it. They leave it sit. But the thing about it is, these are all edible.
Those are the good weeds.
Yeah.
The good weeds, the tasty weeds. Queen Anne's lace is like a little white carrot.
I've always wondered, Keith and Matt, why farmers eradicate weeds in the first place. What do they do to the crops? Do they take them over?
Yeah, they're taking up the nutrients that the crops that they want to go to the crops instead.
I see.
So, yeah.
They don't want to share with the old weeds.
Right. So you pull, in traditional societies, they pull the weeds. And there's a wonderful book from my publisher, Chelsea Green, on edible weeds. And
that's like what Keith's talking about.
That's right, like purslane and dandelions, a whole bunch of pig's feet or lamb's tongues. There's a whole bunch of different weeds that are very edible, and so there's a great book on edible weeds and foraging for edible weeds, and so but not every weed's edible.
That's right.
And so one of the things I teach in both of my books is the plant edibility test, because you can't, there's some basic, fairly fast things, so you can weed out a lot of inedibles very quickly. And using the edibility test by like crushing it and smelling it. Does it smell like almonds? Does it bitter taste? You can rub some on your skin then next and see if you have a bad reaction. Then you put a little teeny piece underneath your tongue. You go step by step by step, because some things are really, really, really poisonous. Most aren't, but some things are, and you don't want to be eating the wrong thing.
No. That's why I frown on people going mushroom hunting if they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm definitely shy away from mushrooms. I'm not an expert on that one, that's for sure. So, but yeah, if you know what you're doing, that's great. But you always read now and then about some mushroom expert guy who really knew what he was doing and still ate the wrong thing. It doesn't happen very often, but you hear about it, and you don't want to be one of those guys that you read about. All
right, let's go west of the Rockies. Jim in Marysville, Washington, and
I wanted to say too that. To your guest there, that Detroit is an example of bad water, but I wanted to ask him, pulling out of the Paris agreements, what's that going to do to the globe?
All right, smart. What do you think of our decision, the president's decision, to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord?
Well, I totally disagree with his decision to pull out. I think that we could have a more positive effect being a part of it than thumbing our nose at it. I think that private industry is still going to be going away from coal and going towards renewables, and that it's survival of the species and survival of civilization really depends on us solving these problems with the new technologies and not clinging to the old technologies. So I think it was a bad decision going in the wrong direction.
Were we the ones, though, taking the brunt of the risk, the money, and everything else?
Now the risk is killing our world. That's the risk. And the science, there's not a single other country in the world, in the West, the civilized world, where it's a political thing, where climate change is a political thing. All the other countries say science is science is science. It's not a left versus right thing. It's not a Republican versus Democrat thing. It's just science. And the trends, those 6 trends I'm talking about, are all headed towards collapse. And if we don't collectively solve these problems, we will collectively go down the toilet together.
Well, that's right. Matt, I want to thank you for being on the program.